My name is Dr. Sarah Merimee. I'm an assistant professor of special education, and this presentation is going to be about tactile stories and symbols for students with complex needs, particularly students with multiple disabilities with a visual impairment as well. Who do these pictures look familiar to? I found in my classroom I was running into my students who were not engaged, especially during reading instruction in a whole group setting. And so I really wanted to find ways that they could become more engaged in the activity. The best way I knew how to come up with a solution was to collaborate with the people around me. So I worked particularly closely with a vision consultant for my district, but also with my speech language therapist in order to come up with possible solutions to our student engagement problem. So after working with the speech language pathologist and the vision consultant, we came up with two solutions that we thought would increase student engagement. First, the inclusion of tactile stories during our reading group, and then second was including partial symbols into the student's schedule throughout the day. Tactile stories are also referred to as story boxes, and these are not new concepts. These are things that have been around before, usually used with younger students, but not particularly used as much with students with moderate to severe disabilities, especially those that don't have a visual impairment. My vision consultant talked to me a lot about the hierarchy of symbols and objects with students with visual impairments in particular, and moving from the whole object to a partial object to a picture of the object and then to the written word if that's possible. The first step in implementing the use of tactile stories in your classroom is to first find stories that are going to work for your students. You want to think about the ability level of your students and think about texts that you can find that include some easy to know or recognize words. From the previous slide, you saw that the story about Valentine's Day had 6 chosen words as the vocabulary to know. So as the teacher, I would then select objects that reflect that word. So we want to aim for actual objects so that the student has something to touch. Once you collect your objects to represent the vocabulary words, you want to then read the story with your students. And as you come to those vocabulary words, you will pull out the object that corresponds. Pass it around and let the students engage with that object, touch it, feel it, smell it, taste it. One of the great things about this strategy is that you can easily keep these together. So you can see examples here of books with their objects. You can put them in Ziploc bags, in Tupperware containers, so that you can store them and use it again. My speech language pathologist and I did an informal study with our students that we had at the time, and we looked at engagement. And you can see here that all the students had high increases of engagement when using the tactile symbols in stories compared to the standard experience. My speech language pathologist also went into further detail by looking at what we considered engagement from these students during story time. So each student kind of demonstrated engagement in different ways, such as eye movement, hand movement, reach, and they all showed improvements using tactile stories. And as the classroom teacher, I was able to notice several things once we started to include tactile objects into our routine. Not only were the students with complex and multiple disabilities engaged, our students without those needs were also more active and engaged throughout the lesson with the objects. If you think you would like to implement story boxes or tactile stories in your classroom, I would suggest these resources. The Path to Literacy website has several examples on story boxes, and then Reading A to Z has leveled books that are available that have those vocab keywords. The second way we wanted to increase this particular student's engagement was to include partial symbols as part of her schedule throughout the day. We so often were found ourselves making decisions for her and not having her anticipate what was coming next. And so we thought this would be a great way to help her move through the day. So the first thing that we did is we looked at her day at school and we tried to identify things that she did every day that we could easily find symbols or partial symbols for to include in her schedule. So things like this included bathroom, morning meeting, lunch, etc. Once we had our activities we wanted to highlight during her day, we tried to find objects that she could easily correlate. So for example, she used a black work mat every time we worked on her IEP goals. So we took a small piece of that material, cut it, and put it on one of her scheduled card boards. This is not necessarily an expensive project to do. You can find most of these things already in your house, but it was helpful to use a black background so that the symbol can stand out and it draws more attention with their eyesight. And then we would show them during the day. Once we had all of our schedule cards created, when that activity was approaching, we would pull it out, show it to our student, let her see it, let her touch it, tell her what it was so that she could make that connection, and then we would follow through with completing the actual activity with her. I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation. If you want to find out more about either tactile stories or the partial schedule symbols, feel free to reach out to me. My email's on the first slide. But in summary, we are hoping that we can do anything and everything we can to make our students more successful and engaged in the classroom.